The moment the freighter pierced Lantara's shimmering atmosphere, Captain John Voscarell knew something was wrong. His HUD blinked red. Atmospheric ion storm detected. Magnetic flux. Unstable. Sirens wailed as the hull rattled, metal groaning, like a wounded beast. Sweat slicked John's brow as he wrestled the yoke, muscles quivering with tension. Outside the viewport, emerald clouds churned and cracked with electric fury, tendrils of plasma dancing across the sky. A violent jolt hurled him against his harness. Warning lights exploded across the dashboard, and the ship lurched downward. John's knuckles whitened around the controls as he throttled back, but the freighter was in freefall. Seconds later, they plowed into a sea of crystalline dunes, each jagged shard of rock glowing with molten heat. The hull screeched and sparks rained from the impact zone. When the world finally stilled, everything was silent except for the hiss of venting air. Alarms abruptly cut out, leaving only emergency lights painting the cockpit in pale blue. John unbuckled himself, every bone in his body rebelling, and staggered forward. His shoulder throbbed where it had struck the console, a sharp reminder of how close they'd come to oblivion. He forced his legs to move, stepping over twisted conduits and shattered glass. The main corridor was half collapsed. Gears and cables lay strewn like the entrails of a mechanical leviathan. He crawled toward the salvage bay, heedless of the small cuts and bruises blooming across his skin. Through the haze of dust, he saw her, the girl, sprawled among the wreckage, luminous as a ghost. Her skin was pale with an almost liquid translucence, and faint motes of light pulsed beneath its surface. Her hair, silver blue and fine as gossamer, drifted around her head like a halo. "Hey." John knelt beside her and pressed a trembling hand to her neck. No pulse. Dying air hissed from a ruptured oxygen canister at her side. He ripped a medkit from his belt, but before he could apply a patch, a muffled thud echoed through the hull, then another. "Imperial patrol fighters," he muttered, heart pounding. Explosions reverberated through the crater beyond the rear bulkhead. Shadows flickered under the fractured plating. The Empire didn't waste time. They must have detected the crash from orbit. He glanced at the girl's prone form, her eyelids fluttering. A soft murmur escaped her lips. No human tongue could produce such a sound. The vibrations settled in John's chest, strange and beautiful, as if the ship itself hummed beneath his boots. He felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Awe. "Come on, stay with me," he rasped. He scooped her into his arms. Despite her frailty, she weighed more than he expected, and her arms slid loosely around his neck. He cradled her, gently as he sprinted toward the salvage bay's emergency bulkhead. Lasers seared across the hull, scorching white-hot trails inches behind him. A beam grazed his pant leg, ripping through fabric, and he stumbled, but kept going. With trembling fingers, he activated the bay's override panel. The massive doors whined as they began to close. More beams lanced through the narrowing gap, setting off sparks and smoke. John could taste metal in his mouth. He pressed the girl against his chest and slammed his shoulder into the final control. With a thunderous clang, the doors sealed shut. Alarms blinked back to life inside the bay. Backup generators hummed, and gravity realigned itself. John sank to one knee, cradling the girl. She lay limp, chest rising and falling shallowly. He peeled back her hood, revealing swirling, luminescent tattoos that traced delicate patterns along her temples and down her arms. She inhaled sharply, her violet eyes snapping open. For a breathless moment, they stared at each other, two survivors in a wounded ship on a hostile world. Outside, distant explosions faded into the rocky silence. Inside, John felt destiny press its weight upon him. This strange girl, This alien emissary was now in his care. He pressed a finger to his comm unit. "Mayday," he said hoarsely. "This is Voscarel. I have one survivor. Send immediate extraction." As he waited for a response that might never come, he cradled her closer, resolved. No matter the cost, he would protect her. And in that stolen instant of quiet, he sensed that nothing in the salvage bay's emergency lights flickered in rhythm with Captain Voscarel's ragged breathing. Through the viewport, Imperial patrol fighters glowed like predatory fireflies against Lantara's dusky sky. John slid a data pad into the console and keyed the last coordinates he'd transmitted, a distress beacon now paling under relentless bombardment. "Hold on," he whispered to Lyra, pressing his jacket against her shivering form. Her pale skin still bore the faint scorch marks where the first laser beams had grazed her. He tore a strip of fabric from his sleeve and wrapped it around her arm, fashioning a makeshift bandage. "Voscarel." The voice crackled over the comm. Speaker, harsh, clipped, and unmistakably imperial. "Cut your losses and surrender that alien. You're surrounded." John's jaw clenched. He tapped the panel to seal the outer airlock. "Negative. I have one classified survivor on board." "Permission to hold position." Static snapped in his ear, then silence. "Imperials don't beg. They give orders." A high-pitched whine echoed behind them as the final bulkhead panel slid open. Two stormtroopers stood silhouetted in the doorway, rifles raised. John didn't hesitate. He rose, shoved Lyra behind a crate, then flung himself at the nearest trooper. Armor plates slammed against his shoulder as he tackled the soldier into the corridor. The trooper's rifle discharged wildly, the blast scorching the salvage bay floor. Inside, Lyra's violet eyes widened with alarm. John's heart hammered. Damn exhaustion, damn the wound burning through his ribs. But he refused to yield. He wrestled the trooper's weapon free, then kicked the fallen soldier aside and swung the rifle in one brutal arc, forcing the second trooper to duck for cover. Panic flared in Lyra's gaze. She rose to flee, but John caught her arm. "Stay low," he hissed, voice tight with urgency. Above the roar of conflict, a piercing scream tore through the ship's metal framework. Explosive charges taking out support beams. The freighter shuddered, sending rivulets of sparks cascading from overhead conduits. John fired at the bulkhead controls, sending twin bolts of plasma streaking across the console. The lights dimmed, the doors ground shut, and the charging shockwave slammed back out into the crater's night. In the residual haze, he sank to one knee beside Lyra. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice catching in his throat. Her lip quivered. She touched his side, fingertips brushing the jagged seam of his uniform. He felt a burst of warmth, as if the thick scarlet fabric itself pulsed under her touch. She closed her eyes and the air around them shimmered in response. Moments later, the pain in his side shifted from agony to a dull ache, a hurricane reduced to a whisper. John blinked, astonished. "How?" Lyra shook her head, breath shuddering in and out. "No time." Her voice was thinner than before, but steadier. "They will come again." He hauled her upright and activated the freighter's thrusters. The engines roared to life, shaking the bay with every vibration. Through the viewport, the patrol fighters wheeled into firing position. Bolts of cobalt blue laser fire pierced the swirling dust outside. John punched the throttles forward. The bay doors peeled open like a wound and the ship lurched free of the crater's rim. Behind them, cascading rockfalls swallowed the patrol fighters' line of sight. Inside, alarms blared as panels overloaded and smoke curled from ruptured conduits. Lyra wrapped her arms around John's midsection, her head resting against his back. He steadied the controls, one hand guiding their ascent, the other cradling her as one might cradle a flickering flame. Stars streaked into lines of white and gold as the freighter punched through Lantara's turbulent atmosphere. John didn't look away from Lyra's silent profile. He tasted sweat and fear and something else. Something like hope. Even as warning klaxons warned of critical power failures, John smiled grimly to himself. He had taken the fire so she might live. And now, more than ever, he knew that nothing, not even a hailstorm of lasers, would stop him from keeping that promise. Gravity normalized to standard 1G as the freighter's autopilot stabilized in deep space. John Voscarell half-carried Lyra down the corridor to the medical bay, every footstep sending jolts of pain through his ribs. The corridor lights glowed soft amber, reflecting off the polished alloy walls. He deposited Lyra gently onto the diagnostic table and activated the biobed's scanning sequence. "Stay still," he murmured, fumbling open his medkit. Sweat gleamed on his forehead, but he welcomed the sting of blood against his fingers. It meant he was alive. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, luminous tattoos tracing faint pulses along her temples. She watched him with lopsided curiosity as he tore open a sterile pack. "Captain," she whispered, voice a musical chime that seemed to resonate in the room's sensors. "Your injuries." John swallowed. "Just flesh and bone. I've survived. Worse." He lifted his shirt sleeve, revealing a ragged wound across his side. Beneath the torn fabric, the skin was mottled and bruised. "But I could use your help if you're up to it." Lyra drew a slow breath. The air crackled with latent energy around her fingertips. She pressed her palm against his wound. John sucked in a breath as a gentle warmth spread from her hand, through his side. The pain ebbed, then vanished entirely, leaving behind nothing but a faint prickle of sensation. "My people call this the heart's code," she explained, voice steady now. "It's a bioweave, living crystal structures that accelerate cellular regeneration. I carry its seed in my blood." Her fingers hovered, hesitating over the freshly healed flesh. "You should feel stronger, but it could take hours before the bond stabilizes." John flexed his side and grinned wryly. "Worth the risk?" He sat up, wincing as the table shifted under his weight. "Why me?" Lyra's gaze dropped. "When your hull collapsed, the beacon in my necklace emitted a distress pulse. It scanned for the nearest sentient life. Your ship's computer answered. It sensed your compassion and your willingness to sacrifice." She drew a slender crystal vial from beneath her robe, its surface alive with pulsing light. "My mission depends on delivering this bioweave to my homeworld, Novaroth Prime. Without it, our dying forests will collapse and thousands will perish." Silence fell. John's mind raced. A universe-spanning conspiracy, an empire eager to commandeer the bioweave, and now a lone alien girl fleeing across the stars. He tucked the vial into his jacket pocket as if it were gravity itself. "Tell me more," he said, voice low. She closed her eyes, voice turning quiet. "Novaroth's core was poisoned by orbital weapons during the 100-Year War. The bioweave is our only hope to reboot the biosphere. I volunteered as emissary to seek help, until the Empire labeled me a threat." Her eyelids flickered with exhaustion. "I nearly lost hope." John leaned forward, setting aside his pride. "You won't lose it again. I'll see you there." He paused, mind racing through hyperdrive charts and patrol zones. "Next stop, the Felix Relay Station. It's the only neutral port near Novaroth's sector, if it still stands." Lyra nodded, relief flickering in her violet eyes. "The Empire's blockade is tightening. We must move swiftly." He helped her to her feet and guided her toward the bridge. Every nerve in his body still throbbed, but he felt alive in a way he never had before, burning with purpose tethered to Lyra's quest. As he stepped to the pilot's console, he glanced back at her. She offered him a faint smile, luminous, tattoos dimming to a gentle glow. And in that quiet exchange, John Voscarell knew he had crossed a threshold. No longer merely a smuggler running cargo for coin, but a protector of a hope powerful enough to heal entire worlds. With Lyra at his, John's fingers hovered over the hyperdrive controls as the freighter coasted into the nebula of Azurine, a vast expanse of cobalt gases and ion storms that shimmered like living art. He keyed the sequence for the long-range jump to the Felix relay, but sensors screamed in protest. 2 Imperial corvettes bristling with turbolasers and tractor beams had locked onto their rear signature. "Buckle in," he warned Lyra, voice taut with urgency. She slid into the co-pilot's seat, bracing her slender frame against the straps. The ship lurched as John ripped power from non-essential systems to boost the aft shields. Outside, the nebula's glowing tendrils writhed against the viewport, creating a kaleidoscope of danger and beauty. The first corvette opened fire. Turbo laser bolts cut through the nebula's mist, slamming into the freighter's shields with thunderous impacts. Warning klaxons shrieked as panels flickered and systems overloaded. John yanked the yoke, rolling the ship hard to port. The corvette's broadside blasts scorched the hull plating, tearing metal and sparking insulation. "Thrusters at 40%, Lyra reported, voice steady despite the chaos. Their tractor beams locking again. "I see it," John growled. He slammed a sequence into the nav console, diverting auxiliary power to lateral thrusters. The freighter careered through a ribbon of glowing gas, the external sensors, bombarded by charged particles until the corvette momentarily lost their lock. "Good job," he said, smirk fleeting across his fatigued features. Lyra's violet eyes met his, and for an instant, the universe fell away. Then, the second corvette, decloaked, emerging like a phantom from the blue haze. Its twin tractor beams latched onto the freighter's stern, yanking them backward toward a hunter-killer drone floating in the nebula's depths. John cursed. He shoved forward the quantum drive lever. "Initiating short-range jump," he announced, and pressed the ignition. The freighter shuddered violently as stars warped into streaks of light, but the corvettes were prepared. Their targeting arrays predicted the jump vector and fired ion torpedoes just as the engines bled into hyperspace. The freighter jolted, systems flickering out one by one as the torpedoes struck in the sublight phase. The bridge went dark, alarms echoing in the vacuum of space. John seized the manual overrides, rerouted emergency power, and felt the ancient vessel groan back to life. "Backup navigation online," he rasped. "Plot new course." "Coordinates locked to Felix relay," Lyra confirmed, tapping holographic controls with surprising deftness. "But we'll have to thread through the mare's teeth. Asteroid. Fragments electrified by the nebula's charge. No other way," John said. He engaged the impulse drives and steered them into the tumbling field of rock and plasma. Meteoroid shards spun past, ionized streaks snapping around them like living lightning. John wove the freighter in and out of the larger fragments, every second testing the limits of his skill and the ship's battered frame. The corvettes gave chase, their own shields flickering as they entered the charged zone. Lasers lanced through the field, illuminating the floating stones in deadly arcs of white light. "Ready on my mark," John muttered, lining up a salvage drone drifting among the asteroids. "When I hit it, stay focused on the nav console. Divert their attention. Draw their fire." Lyra nodded, heart pounding in tandem with his. "Now." John fired the freighter's last working missile at the drone. The salvage unit exploded, in a storm of metal and circuitry. The burst of debris sprayed across the path of the leading corvette, damaging its shields and forcing it into evasive maneuvers. Seizing the moment, John punched the hyperdrive again. With a wrenching lurch, the freighter vaulted into hyperspace, leaving both the nebula's beauty and its perils behind. In the sudden calm of warp, Lyra exhaled. "You did it." John closed his eyes, letting the hum of the engines steady his racing pulse. He placed a hand over his side, still tender from Lyra's healing. "We did it," he corrected, voice soft. They drifted in the electric blue of hyperspace, bound together by danger and by choice. Ahead lay the Felix relay, and the next gambit in their desperate race to save a world. A hush fell over the gleaming amphitheater of the Cerebrian Council Hall as Lyra and John stepped onto the obsidian dais. Pillars of crystalline light arched overhead, refracting into hundreds of dancing rainbows that played across every face in the chamber. 30 delegates from the Grand Alliance of Star Nations were arrayed before them. Ambassadors draped in planetary silks, military envoys in polished cerametal, and shadowy diplomats whose loyalty was whispered rather than proclaimed. At the center, perched on a throne of ion-forged marble, sat High Chancellor Immerse Ven. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe coil, and her ice-blue eyes glittered with curiosity. Behind her, enormous viewports looked out on the jagged spires of Cerebrion Prime, a world rebuilt from the ashes of the last solar revolt. Chancellor Ven's voice, carried by the hall's grav acoustic amplifiers, was calm but cutting. "Lyra, of Novaroth, you stand accused of contravening the Imperial Pact by smuggling illegal bioweave onto sovereign worlds. Explain yourself." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One or two delegates glanced nervously at John, the human captain whose reputation as a daredevil smuggler preceded him. Lyra inhaled, straightening her slender shoulders. "Honorable Chancellor, esteemed delegates, I carry not contraband but the living seed of regeneration for my dying world. Novaroth Prime's biosphere collapsed after orbital bombardments poisoned the soil and atmosphere. Without the Novaroth bioweave." She lifted the crystal vial for all to see, its inner light pulsing like a heartbeat. "Nothing can heal those wounded lands." An Imperial envoy, Ambassador Martek, rose with a sneer. Clad in the Empire's black and red livery, he swept his gaze over the bioweave. "Peaceful talk, Lyra, but you would see the galaxy overrun by uncontrolled living organisms. The Empire has laws for protection. Your reckless gambit threatens countless lives." John stepped forward, pain still evident in his gait but steeled in his posture. "With all due respect, Ambassador, the only threat here is your blockade of Lantara, and every world in need of healing. I've seen this bioweave in action. It knit flesh, revitalized soil, restored forests overnight. More dangerous than life is the Empire's practice of leaving entire planets to die." A murmur of approval swept through half the chamber. The pro-alliance delegates exchanged glances, emboldened by John's boldness. Ambassador Martek's lips curled. "Captain Voscarel, you admit to shielding a fugitive. That is treason." John squared his shoulders. "I admit only to doing what was right. You call her fugitive." He gestured at Lyra. "I call her savior." Silence stretched, taut. Then from the far side of the hall a soft voice spoke. "This council's mission is peace and prosperity." Elder Ambassador Kithra of the Epsilon Accord rose, her star-lilac gown whispering across the floor. "If we deny Lyra's plea, we condemn Novaroth, Lantara, and countless worlds to desolation." "Is that your vision of peace, Chancellor?" The chamber held its breath as Chancellor Ven regarded Kithra, then turned slowly to Lyra. "You risk much by coming here, emissary. If your claims are false—" Lyra's violet eyes burned with resolve. "Test me. Send envoys to Lantara. Observe the restored biosphere yourself." Chancellor Ven studied her for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "So be it." The Council of Worlds will dispatch a fact-finding team to Lantara under a temporary ceasefire. And... She paused, eyes sweeping the hall. 2. Captain Voscarel, for your courage and sacrifice under fire, the Grand Alliance grants diplomatic immunity and safe passage. So decreed. A ripple of astonished applause filled the hall. Lyra's hand trembled as she raised the bio-weave crystal. Toward the light, John placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, their fingers brushing in a quiet affirmation. As they descended the dais, the chamber's tension dissolved into a chorus of whispers. Hope, at last, for Novaroth, a new ally in Voscarel, and the first real defeat of the Empire's chokehold on healing technologies. Outside, beneath the vast multi-hued dome, the freighter's engines purred to life. John helped Lyra aboard, and she tucked the crystal vial carefully into its secure cradle. Together, they would pilot the ship back toward a war-ravaged world, this time under the protection of the Council's decree. John glanced at Lyra's profile bathed in the soft glow of the cockpit. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "Let's go save a world." As the engines hummed louder and the freighter lifted from the platform, John realized that their greatest challenge lay ahead, delivering hope to a battered planet and ensuring that the Empire never again held the power to let it die. The freighter glided into Lantara's upper atmosphere under the escort of 2 Council frigates. Through the cockpit viewport, John Voscarel watched in awe as the once barren world bloomed beneath them. Vast forests of crystalline flora stretched to the horizon, their prismatic leaves swaying in gentle breezes. Rivers once run dry carved serpentine paths of liquid light across emerald plains. Lyra sat beside him, her violet eyes reflecting the kaleidoscope below. In her hands she cradled a scanning crystal that pulsed with the planet's renewed life essence. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," she whispered. John reached over, brushing a stray lock of silver-blue hair from her brow. "You did this," he said softly. "All of this." She shook her head, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "We did this." They landed on a raised platform at the Lantaran starport where thousands had gathered. Scientists, engineers, farmers, and refugees, all waiting to witness the miracle of the bioweave. As the ramp descended, a hush fell, then erupted into cheers. Children darted forward, their laughter ringing like crystal bells, while elders wept at the sight of blossoms in the distance. Lyra stepped onto the platform, carrying the scanning crystal. Beside her, John stood tall, his uniform still, scarred by the battle but his posture proud. She held the crystal aloft and its light cascaded over the crowd. In that moment, the planet itself seemed to exhale in relief. Scientists rushed forward, marveling at the data streams of regeneration surging from the bioweave seed. Agronomists knelt in the mud, planting crystalline spores that unfurled into seedlings within seconds. Engineers activated terraforming arrays that hummed to life, powered by the crystal's resonance. John guided Lyra aside to a quiet overlook, where the twin suns hung low in the lavender sky. "What happens now?" he asked. Lyra gazed at the reborn landscape. "Now we build," she said. "We teach other worlds to heal themselves, and we ensure the Empire never weaponizes life again." He smiled, feeling the weight of his past life fall away. "I want to help, not as your guard, but as your partner." Her eyes softened, the luminescent tattoos along her arms glowing brighter. "I would like that," she replied. They clasped hands, fingers entwining like vines growing toward sunlight. Below them, the first true forest of Lantara rustled in celebration. As dusk fell, the Council frigates rose on thermic currents, their decks alight with ceremony. High Chancellor Ven's envoy presented John with the Council's Star of Unity, a medal forged from Novoroth crystal and Lantaran steel, acknowledging his sacrifice and his new role as Ambassador of Renewal. Under the glow of both suns, John affixed the star to his uniform. He turned to Lyra, heart swelling with promise. "Ready for our next mission?" Lyra offered him a playful salute. "To the farthest stars." And so, with worlds saved and destinies entwined, they embarked on a new voyage, two souls charting a horizon of hope across the boundless tap.